Hare Krishna devotees, welcome to Sloka Day. Today we'll begin chapter 12. Chapter 12 is the last chapter of the middle 6 chapters on Bhakti Yoga. But today's chapter is also called Bhakti Yoga. Bhakti Yoga, of course, means devotional service, not just devotion, but devotional service. Arjuna Uvacha
Arjuna Uvacha
Evam Satata Yuktaye
Evam Satata Yuktaye
Bhaktastvam Paryupasate
Bhaktastvam Paryupasate
Ye Chapyaksharam Avyaktam
Echapyaksharam Avyaktam
Tesham Ke Yoga Vittamaha.
Tesham Ke Yoga Vittamaha.
Word for word meaning, translation and purport by His Divine Grace Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Arjunaha Uvacha.
Arjuna Uvacha
Arjuna said,
Arjuna said
Evam,
Evam
thus,
thus
Satata,
Satata
always,
always
Yuktaha,
Yuktaha
engaged,
engaged
Ye,
those
who, Bhaktaha,
Bhaktaha
devotees,
Twam
you, Paryupasate, properly worship, Ye, those who, Cha, also, Api, again, Aksharam, beyond the senses, Avyaktam, the unmanifested, Tesham, of them, Ke, who, Yoga Vittamaha, the most perfect in knowledge of yoga.
the most perfect in knowledge of yoga.
Translation. Arjuna inquired, which are considered to be more perfect? Those who are always properly engaged in your devotional service?
Those who are always properly engaged in your devotional service?
Or those who worship the impersonal Brahman, the unmanifested?
Are those who worship the impersonal Brahman, the unmanifested?
So, Prabhupada has written an exhaustive purport to this, but before we get to Srila Prabhupada's purport, let's look at the summary view of this chapter. As we said, this Bhakti Yoga is defined and explained by Prabhupada to include the word service, not just devotion. If you only use the word devotion, it implies you're just sitting somewhere and doing some bhajan or you're chanting. Bhajan should include seva. Chanting is important, but as we said, the mood for the Vaishnavas is seva vritti. So this is the last chapter in the Bhakti Yoga conception. All the 18 chapters in Bhagavad Gita talk about bhakti. But the first 6 chapters focus on karma and how karma leads to bhakti. The last 6 chapters talk about jnana and how jnana leads to bhakti. The middle 6 chapters focus on bhakti itself. So this is a commentary written by His Grace Chaitanya Charan Prabhu. In the 10th chapter, Arjuna has accepted Krishna's supremacy and asked to see Krishna's greatness in nature, vibhuti. Shri Krishna shows how he sustains the whole world with one fragment of his being in 10.42. And in response to that, Arjuna asked to see Virat Rupa. And then Krishna shows him the Virat Rupa in the 11th chapter. Then Arjuna asked about the impersonal aspect of absolute truth in 9.15, which underlies the critical 4 of later chapters. Jnana yajnena chapyanye yajanto mamupasate ekatvena pritaktavena bahudha vishvato mukham. This is from the ninth shloka, ninth chapter, 15th shloka. So there are three ways in which people do Jnana Yoga, worship Krishna through the sacrifice of knowledge. Ekatvena, in oneness. Pritatvena, in through the worship of demigods. And then Vishvato Mukham is the universal cosmic form worship. Out of this Pritatvena Bahuda is talked about in the ninth chapter itself, from 9.20 to 9.28, where Shri Krishna says that those who worship demigods have to continue the cycle of birth and death. In 9.21, Gata Gatam Kama Kama Labhate, and in 9.22, devotees, I protect them. Ananyas Chintayanto Mam Ye Janaf Paryupasate, Tesham Nityabhiyuktanam Yoga Kshemam Mahamya, where the Lord says, I preserve for devotees what they have and carry for them what they lack. So Vishwarupa Upasana is talked briefly in that chapter from verses 16 to 19, which means the Lord already talks about it in chapter 9. And then, because Arjuna asks that question, it is talked about in greater detail in the 11th chapter. So what's remaining? So in the 9th chapter, Bahuda Vishvato Mukham is briefly discussed, and in the 11th chapter it is given in greater detail. Pritatvena is also discussed in chapter 9. So that means Ekatvena is not discussed. So what is this Ekatvena? What does it refer to? Which is the concept of worshipping the absolute truth. In oneness, thinking oneself to be one with the absolute truth. This is what Arjuna will question now. Here, question now meaning here in the 12th chapter. There are people who believe that they are also Parabrahman. It's just that they have lost track of themselves. So worship of the personal form is superior to the impersonal Brahman. Arjuna's question begins with asking, what is better, worshipping your formless aspect or worshipping your personal form? The formless aspect is what the jnanis focus on. The jnanis focus on understanding Brahman, Parabrahman. Therefore, the Lord responds to that question, and then he will conclude by talking about the different stages of bhakti. And ultimately, the Lord concludes this chapter by focusing on the qualities that his devotees possess that really endear them to him. Endear means what makes Krishna fall in love with you is the qualities that you develop, that you exhibit. So this chapter talks about how bhakti is the best process for transcendence. Then how bhakti can be practiced at multiple levels, and how one will cultivate qualities that will make one a devotee. On hearing from Krishna that God is an attractive person who reciprocates love, is far more special than God's form that encompasses the universe, Arjuna wonders whether the same might apply to God's impersonal manifestation, which too permeates all of existence. Krishna answers in the affirmative by declaring that those who love him are more intimately united with him than those who worship the impersonal absolute. Elaborating through contrast, Krishna states that worshipping the impersonal absolute is difficult, whereas he personally delivers those who love him. A personal God who reciprocates love is far more special than a God who spans the cosmos, be it by encompassing it as the universal form or by permeating it as an impersonal substrate. From another parampara, even the great proponent of the path, Jnana Yoga Jagadguru Shankaracharya stated, Murtam Chaiva Murtam Dve Eva Brahmano Rupe Ityupanishad Tayorva Dvau Bhaktau Bhagavad Upadishtau Klesha Dakleshadva Muktisyadheratya Tayor Madhye. The Supreme Entity is both personal and impersonal. Practitioners of the spiritual path are also of two kinds, devotees of the formless Brahman and devotees of the personal form. but the path of worshipping the formless is very difficult. So who is writing this commentary? And this, who has composed this shloka? Adi Shankaracharya himself. So he is also acknowledging that worshipping the Brahman aspect, which is what the Advaita philosophy is all about, that we are non-different than the Lord. But obviously, Shankaracharya has in many, many shlokas glorified the Supreme Lord. So here is one shloka where he's stating and repeating what the Lord is saying in the Bhagavad Gita. That is why the Lord uses the word embodied in one of the shlokas here. For the embodied soul, it is very difficult to worship the formless. How can you worship the formless? If you take an example of formless, or if you take an example of impersonal, how long will you worship that impersonal before you get tired of it? So coming to Srila Prabhupada's purport, Krishna has now explained about the personal, the impersonal, and the universal, and has described all kinds of devotees and yogis. Generally, the transcendentalists can be divided into two classes. One is the impersonalist, and the other is the personalist. The personalist devotee engages himself with all energy in the service of the Supreme Lord. The impersonalist who engages himself not directly in the service of Krishna, but in meditation on the impersonal Brahman, the unmanifest. So those who worship the formless aspect of the Lord, what are they actually worshipping? They are actually meditating on Parabrahman, the unmanifested, something that you cannot see, something in a resting state. Now, as far as Arjuna is concerned, he says that his illusion is over. This means that Arjuna no longer thinks of Krishna as a mere human being, as a friend of his, but as the source of everything. Arjuna is very enlightened and is glad that he has such a great friend as Krishna. But now he is thinking that although he may accept Krishna as the source of everything, others may not. So, in order to establish Krishna's divinity for all, he is requesting Krishna in this chapter to show his universal form. Actually, when one sees the universal form of Krishna, one becomes frightened, like Arjuna. But Krishna is so kind that after showing it, he converts himself again into his original form. Arjuna agrees to what Krishna has several times said. Krishna is speaking to him just for his benefit. So Arjuna acknowledges that all that is happening to him is by Krishna's grace. He is now convinced that Krishna is the cause of all causes and is present in everyone's heart as a supersoul. We find in this chapter that of the different processes for realization of the absolute truth, bhakti yoga, devotional service, is the highest. If one at all desires to have the association of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, then he must take to devotional service. Those who worship the Supreme Lord directly by devotional service are called personalists. Those who engage themselves in the meditation on the impersonal Brahman are called impersonalists. Arjuna is here questioning which position is better. There are different ways to realize the absolute truth. But Krishna indicates in this chapter that bhakti yoga or devotional service to him is the highest of all. It is the most direct and it is the easiest means for association with the Godhead. We find in this chapter that of the different processes for realization of the absolute truth, bhakti yoga, devotional service, is the highest. If one at all desires to have the association of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, then he must take to devotional service. It is not that worship of the formless or focusing on meditating on the Parabrahman is incorrect. That is also a path. It's just that it's problematic, as Krishna himself will say in this chapter. In the second chapter of Bhagavad Gita, the Supreme Lord explained that the living entity is not the material body. He is a spiritual spark. And the absolute truth is the spiritual whole. In the seventh chapter, he spoke of the living entity as being part and parcel of the supreme whole and recommended that he transfer his attention fully to the whole. Then again, in the eighth chapter, it was said that anyone who thinks of Krishna at the time of quitting his body is at once transferred to the spiritual sky, to the abode of Krishna. And at the end of the 6th chapter, the Lord clearly said that of all yogis, one who always thinks of Krishna within himself is considered the most perfect. So in practically every chapter, the conclusion has been that one should be attached to the personal form of Krishna, for that is the highest spiritual realization. Nevertheless, there are those who are not attached to the personal form of Krishna. They are so firmly detached that even in the preparation of commentators to Bhagavad Gita, they want to distract other people from Krishna and transfer all devotion to the impersonal Brahma Jyoti. They prefer to meditate on the impersonal form of the Absolute Truth, which is beyond the reach of the senses and is not manifest. Many times, some of us may feel that Prabhupada is being quite harsh with those who follow the Advaita path. Because those who have written commentary on the Bhagavad Gita, they have essentially, as Prabhupada is writing here, distracted everybody's attention away from Krishna. And it is that distraction away from Krishna that is coming across as deep criticism of the philosophy, not of the person, of the path, that they are promoting worship of the Brahma Jyoti as the topmost, whereas that is not what Krishna is advocating for at all. Not just in the 12th chapter, not in any chapter is he advocating worshipping the Brahma Jyoti. They prefer to meditate on the impersonal form of the Absolute Truth, which is beyond the reach of the senses and is not manifest. And so factually, there are two classes of transcendentalists. Now Arjuna is trying to settle the question of which process is easier and which of the classes is most perfect. In other words, he is clarifying his own position because he is attached to the personal form of Krishna. He is not attached to the impersonal Brahman. He wants to know whether his position is secure. The impersonal manifestation, either in this material world or in the spiritual world of the Supreme Lord, is a problem for meditation. Actually, one cannot perfectly conceive of the impersonal feature of the Absolute Truth. Therefore, Arjuna wants to say, what is the use of such a waste of time? Arjuna experienced in the 11th chapter that to be attached to the personal form of Krishna is best, because he could thus understand all other forms at the same time, and there was no disturbance to his love for Krishna. This important question asked of Krishna by Arjuna will clarify the distinction between the impersonal and personal conceptions of the Absolute Truth. So this is a very important question that Arjuna has asked, which brings clarity as to what is Krishna's preference and what is Krishna's thought process in this entire aspect of different paths of transcendentalism. But the two main paths are Advaita and Dvaita. And of course, within Dvaitism, there are different rungs or branches, you could say, different varieties of Dvaitism also being practiced with different levels of understanding of the concept of duality. So that's the essence of Arjuna's question, which lays the foundation for Krishna to emphatically state that worship of the personal form of him is most perfect. So Arjuna's question included the word which is more perfect. Therefore, Krishna will use the same words that Arjuna has asked his question in and state that the worship of him in his personal form is the most perfect.
If you like our videos, please subscribe to our channel and turn on the bell notification. If you'd like to join our classes every day, please check the details in the description section of this video. We look forward to serving you.